The following program was produced by the Theosophical Society in America.
Good evening, friends. Thank you for coming. It is always nice, very nice to share our interest in learning how to lead a better life, a spiritual life we can call it, or a more a life that is closer to the ideal of what a human being is. Because we say we are human beings, but if we look up on the dictionary, the qualities of a human being are usually described as kindness and altruism and love, but we don't always show these qualities. So the idea tonight is to explore how in our daily life, whatever we are doing, how we can awaken these qualities that by definition are in ourselves as human beings. Let me first talk a little bit about this White Lotus Day. As Juli said, we commemorate the death of Elena Blavatsky, who was one of the founders of the Theosophical Society. And some people feel that it's kind of odd to celebrate the death of a person and not the birth. But I guess we celebrate the death because we are celebrating the whole life. You know, when she was born, nobody knew what was going to be her influence on the world. So by celebrating her death, we are celebrating her life and work and service for humanity. And also because from a theosophical point of view, this physical life is not necessarily the most important aspect of our existence. It's very important. There is a reason why we are alive on the physical plane, but also what happens after death is part of the soul's evolution and is very important also. So death doesn't have the connotation of something bad from a theosophical point of view. And the lotus is a flower. We couldn't get lotuses here. We would like to have this flower, you know, but we couldn't get them. But the lotus is usually a symbol for several things, for the universe as a whole, and also for the human being. And it is a very interesting symbol, because the lotus has its roots in the mud, and then the stem goes through the water, and the flower blooms in the air, you know, and receives the sunlight or the heat from the sun. And these elements, earth, water, air, fire, are described as being the elements of the universe. So the lotus represents like a human being. We have a physical body, which would be the mud. We have an emotional nature, that is the water. But we go through the emotional nature and our mind blooms. In the air would represent the world of thought and mind. But we are opening our mind to the sunlight, to the power of the spirit, to the fire that comes from above. So the lotus is a symbol of this spiritual aspiration in its whole process of blooming, growing and blooming. So that's one of the reasons why it was chosen, the lotus was chosen as a symbol to commemorate the works and life of Blavatsky. And also, when we are commemorating Blavatsky's work, we try to follow as a tradition something that she recommended. Somebody asked her, what would you like that we could do to commemorate your life? And Blavatsky said, oh, I don't care about that. She was very much like that. But they insisted, So she said, well, I guess you could read a chapter from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu sacred scripture, and one chapter from The Light of Asia, which is a poem about the Buddha's life. At that time, it was the only work in English about the Buddha and his teachings. It was written by Edwin Arnold. So she said, well, you could meet together, read about this, and try to think about or talk about the spiritual life. And then when she died, we added the custom of reading also from The Voice of the Silence. This is a book that Blavatsky herself wrote. It's a mystic work. It's a very interesting work. So we usually read from these three sources. This evening I have prepared this talk based on these three books. I'm going to read quotes from these three books, which are very insightful, and I think that they are really pointing out to this subject, how to awaken our spiritual consciousness in our daily life. So I would like to start by reading a quote from The Voice of the Silence. It says, "Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to all illusion." So before the soul can see, we have to get to certain harmony within. So harmony is the first step that we have to take. Then it goes on saying, before the soul can hear, the image, the human being, has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of the elephant as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. So before the soul can hear, we have to become like stable, without being thrown here and there, either by the sounds that seem frightening or by subtle sounds. So this that I would call this equanimity is needed. First, we have to get to certain harmony, and then we have to develop certain equanimity in our lives. Then it goes, before the soul can comprehend and remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united, just as the form to which the clay is modeled is first united with the potter's mind. So before the soul can comprehend and remember its true origin, it has to be united to the silent speaker. This silent speaker is what in some other traditions is called the witness, or this consciousness that is beyond thoughts. That's why silent speaker. And silent speaker, because there is really, this book is called The Voice of the Silence. There is really like some vision or some message that comes from our silent nature, but it's not in the forms of thoughts. So we are going to go into this deeper, but this third step is we have to be united to this silent speaker in this attitude that we could call witnessing. So these three steps, the verse finishes saying, for then the soul will hear and will remember, and then to the inner ear will speak the voice of the silence. So these three steps are necessary, according to this book, to be able to listen to the voice of the silence, to our real nature. Traditionally, the Theosophical approach to the spiritual life is very holistic. We don't believe that meditation, for example, by itself can take us to realization of truth. Meditation is important, but it's not all that is needed. The same with study. Study is important. We have to try to grasp what reality is, or maybe we could say we have to try to grasp what illusion is, what is not real, so that we can perceive what is real. So study is important, but of course, if our relationship to books is only intellectual, that's not enough either. And also service is a third element that is important, because service is not only as giving money to the poor, service as an attitude in our daily life. We are going to go through all this. But service is a way to recognizing this unity that is at the foundation of the universe. This is a way to break our self-centeredness and to develop sensitivity, sensitivity to everything that is out there. If we are always caught up in our thoughts and needs and personal life, it is very difficult to perceive something that is universal, that goes beyond our personal life. So service is a very important aspect also. So the whole talk will go around these concepts, these 3 steps, and these 3 disciplines, let's say meditation, study, and service, can help at those levels, can help developing harmony, equanimity, and finally helping us to establish ourselves in that state of witnessing. So let us go first to examine how to develop this harmony inside us. Another important point that is usually made in the theosophical approach is that our motivation is very important. We may do service and meditate and study, but if our motivation is selfish, then none of these activities are going to take us really far. Because after all, we are doing these things for ourselves, and it's not really different from trying to get physical things for ourselves. More cars, bigger houses, more virtue. Of course, there is certain difference between trying to develop ourselves spiritually, even if it is self-centered, and trying just to gather more material things. But deep in the root of our activities, if the sense of self-profit is there is a limitation, an intrinsic limitation. So the first thing we have to do is to work on our motivation. We have to be honest, because of course all of us, we are suffering and we want to be happy. That's perfectly right. And we want to meditate first because we want to be happy. But as we are aware of everything, as we are aware of our psychological processes, and we start being aware of other people, we start recognizing that other people's suffering is as important as mine. And we also learn that by helping other people at least a little bit to be happier, we are helping us to be happier. And not just as a theory, we can experience that. Because what actually happens is that our sense of selfishness begins to weaken, and then this inherent happiness that is part of our spiritual nature is able to express without so many hindrances. So the first quotes that I want to read are related to harmony in the sense of creating or performing good actions. So the voice of the silence says, to live to benefit mankind is the first step. To practice the 6 glorious virtues is the second. These virtues are called the paramitas in Buddhism. And, one would think, well, first I have to become virtuous in order to be able to do good things, good deeds. But the voice of the silence says, no, first, in your heart, you have to have this feeling of trying to help humanity. Not in a grandiose way, not necessarily, being an activist. If we are, that's okay, but this refers to why are we trying to improve ourselves. For example, if we are sensitive, when in our relationships we hurt people around, people that we care for, or even people who are neutral, if we are sensitive at all, we don't want to create suffering. So we want to work on our things, on our shortcomings, our reactions, not so much to improve ourselves, but to stop causing suffering in other people. So if we get to this sensitivity, then that's the right motivation. That's the motivation that will allow really a blooming of our inner nature. As I said, normally we will have mixed motivations, mixed motives, and that's okay. We have to become aware of whatever is there. In spirituality, there is no use in feeling guilty or feeling, that we are bad people or good people. We have to be humble and objective and see whatever is there and work with whatever is there. But then what the voice of the silence says is that the most important thing is first to have the right motivation. And another interesting book that is called At the Feet of the Master says, talking about study, says, study then, but study first that which will most help you and to help others. Will most help you to help others. Work patiently at your studies, not that men may think you are wise, not even that you may have the happiness of being wise, but because only the wise man can be wisely helpful. However much you wish to help, if you are ignorant, you may do more harm than good. So again here, we have the attitude of service should come from this sense of trying really to help others. But at the same time, we need to be wise to be able to help in the right way. So we try to understand life, ourselves, the universe, not so much to be scholars or to be learned people, but to be able to help and to have the right kind of life. Then in most traditions, it is said that good actions produce harmony within. Because when we perform good actions with the right motivation, we are actually feeling love, feeling compassion, feeling, this empathy. So our feelings, our thoughts, naturally begin to be more in tune with these feelings and not with hate or with jealousy or anger. So the very fact of engaging or being alert to have this attitude of service is a way of producing harmony within. We all know that what breaks our harmony is when we are upset or angry or, when we have these feelings, of course we don't have harmony inside. And sometimes we think that we may get harmony if we can shape the environment around us and have everything we imagine is going to make us happy. But unfortunately, that is impossible because other people want to do the same, and many times there will be a conflict. Maybe both of us want the same job or want, the same thing, or maybe what makes me happy is making unhappy another person. That's the nature of life. So if each one of us is trying to shape the environment to suit himself or herself, then we are all pulling to our side from the same, rope, and their conflict is bound to happen. But on the contrary, if we can put more emphasis on this cooperative attitude, then you will see that very fact begins to make us forget more and more about our own created needs. Because our needs are really not that many. We have need for shelter, and a love in our lives, and a job, and not many things. But then, since we are unhappy, and we are in a culture that says, well, you could be happy if you had more things, then our needs, increase and are constantly increasing. But as we have this attitude of sharing, of being more aware of other people's needs, we forget about our created needs. It's like a person who is too self-conscious about his or her appearance, then any little thing that may happen in his or her skin could depress that person for the whole day because he's so focused on himself. So if that person is not so self-centered, then the many things like that doesn't bother him. The same in our psychological self. If we are too self-centered, any little thing that happens around will produce an impact on us, will bother us. So this aspect of performing good actions is a way to produce harmony in ourselves. The voice of the silence again says, suffering and pain, these can be silenced only by the voice of virtue. If thou wouldest reap sweet peace and rest, disciple, sow with the seeds of merit the fields of future harvest. So kindly acts, and thou shalt reap their fruition. Inaction in a deed of mercy becomes an action in a deadly sin. This is, poetic and symbolic. But basically, this is saying, what every spiritual teacher says, if we give love, there will be love in our lives. Whatever we put out there is what we receive. So to have this harmony, we have to start helping other people to be in harmony. It's not that some people say, or we in some points of our lives, we say, oh, well, if I had this, then I could do this or that. I could be a good person if I had this. Well, it's the other way around. Start giving what you are looking for. But again, not if you are giving to receive, then you are not giving, you are trading. But if there is this sensitivity and we start paying attention to people's needs, naturally, there will be this constant feedback. And also, these good actions help us awaken our spiritual nature. For example, in the voice of this part, the voice of the silence talks a lot about good actions. So that's why I have so many quotes from this book. It says, "Shalt thou abstain from action? Not so shall gain thy soul her freedom. To reach nirvana, one must reach self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is of loving deeds the child." So this is very interesting to me. The voice of the silence says, self-knowledge is the result of good deeds, of loving deeds. We wouldn't usually probably relate self-knowledge to these good deeds. But I guess the reason is because this self-knowledge, the real self-knowledge, is a knowledge of our spiritual nature, not only a psychological knowledge. So we can start perceiving our psychological nature only when there is this harmony and when this personal self is not so active and so disrupting. And The Light of Asia said, "For countless wealth to lay up lasting treasure, of perfect service rendered, duties done in charity, soft speech, and stainless days, these riches shall not fade away in life, nor any death dispraise. Then sorrow ends, for life and death have ceased." So again, the idea that the very act of generating this charity in our hearts will produce a transformation in ourselves. So all this points out that to be able to create this harmony, this inner harmony, in our lives, we can start being more alert, having more of this service spirit, this spirit of service. This sensitivity will produce harmony in ourselves. And then when there is harmony, there can be a state of balance inside. Because if there is no harmony, if our emotions go too high and too low, it's really difficult to have this attitude of equanimity. So the first step is to put some order in our emotions and mind. And then we may be able to have this attitude of equanimity. So now let us see how we can develop this equanimity. Something that is in several traditions is this capacity to develop actions without being worried in the result of the action. Sometimes it is called desireless actions. That means if we can act and do the right thing without expecting anything from happening, without expecting anything particular result, then we may acquire this equanimity inside. So for example, the Light of Asia said, "What good I see humbly I seek to do, and live obedient to the law, in trust that what will come and must come shall come well." So the first requisite for this desireless action is to trust life, is to have this view, this vision that whatever happens is the right thing to happen. The problem is that we are afraid usually. We are afraid of life. And we are raised thinking that life is a struggle. And that if we don't fight hard, then life will step on us. But what we usually don't see is that if we face life in that way, we are creating that reaction. And life, of course, becomes a jungle. It could be seen very easily if we were a community and each one of us were having this attitude of, fighting for what we want, then we generate a jungle. But if we all agree and try to have a cooperative attitude, then the jungle is not there. So what it is said in most traditions is that the same happens when a person tries to have this attitude of distrust in the process, then whatever happens is really something that helps in this growth. Because we are setting in motion forces that are there in nature, but that usually don't work on people because they are working, with this sense of self-gaining, of self-profit. So there are certain kind of energies that have nothing to do with that kind of attitude. But as soon as a person tries to go with life instead of against life, there are other forces that begin to have, an influence on that person's life. And if we study our lives, we can see that there is an order in things that happen. Maybe when we are going through a difficult situation, we don't understand why, we don't see the purpose. But when we go through that and we look back, we understand why. We see how that really was a blessing. It was hard, it created suffering, but it was a blessing. Just like when we send our kids to school. They don't want to go to school and they cry and they prefer to stay playing, but then they recognize that's a blessing. So the same with life. If we can trust that everything that happens has an order, then we can develop this attitude of doing the right thing without expecting something in particular. So the Bhagavad Gita says, "Thy business is with the action only, never with its fruits. So let not the fruit of action be thy motive, nor be thou to inaction attached. Perform action, dwelling in union with the divine, renouncing attachments, and balanced evenly in success and failure. This equilibrium is called yoga." At the feet of the Master says, "You must do right for the sake of the right, not in the hope of reward. You must work for the sake of the work, not in the hope of seeing the result. You must give yourself to the service of the world because you love it and cannot help giving yourself to it." So this concept, do whatever you have to do, but not expecting certain particular result. Because also we don't know. We think that something is good for us, but how much we really know? Sometimes people say, there is a saying that God punishes people by granting their desires, Because, many times we want things that we think are good, but they are not good at all. Sometimes they are, but we don't know. So if we do something expecting certain outcome, if that outcome is not the one that we expected, then we are depressed or angry, and maybe that's perfect. The outcome is perfect for us. Or maybe we are very happy with the outcome of something that we forced to produce, and maybe that's not good at all. So if we can trust in this order that is in life, then we can accept whatever is there. To develop this trust, we need several things. Study is important because when we study, we can change our perspective. We can see how different traditions see life, see that they postulate that there is justice, that there is an order in life. This study may open up our minds to certain view that is not there already. And once we have this idea, we may start trying to see actually how life works, how our life develops. And then we may see by ourselves that there is an order behind things that happen. And so it's important to try to open our minds to these concepts, also to study life itself, and to engage in this action without expecting the result, because that produces this equanimity. When we can trust in the process and we don't depend on the result, we can go through life without being thrown here and there by the results, by what happens. And something else that helps and is recommended in several traditions is to perform any action as an offering to the divine. So, for example, the Bhagavad Gita says, "The world is bound by action." Action means karma. Karma means action in the Hindu tradition. So they think what we do usually is binding us to this, to be reborn, because we produce causes, and the effects, we have to be reborn to reap the effects. So many people in Hinduism, they say, you don't have to act, because if you act, you generate karma that will bring you back. Well, the Bhagavad Gita is pretty much against that. The Bhagavad Gita said, you could prevent physical action, but you are constantly feeling and thinking, and that's also action, and that also generates karma. So to refrain from action is silly. You have to do whatever you do in this way, as a sacrifice or an offering to the divine. Let's go on with the quote. So the Bhagavad Gita said, "The world is bound by action, unless performed for the sake of sacrifice." Sacrifice in the sense of offering, not of something difficult or painful. "For that sake, free from attachment, perform thou action." And again, "He who acteth, placing all actions in the eternal, abandoning attachment, is unaffected by sin, as a lotus leaf by the waters." The leaf of a lotus has a kind of oil, so the water never, always goes through the leaf and never gets the leaf wet. So if we act placing all actions in the eternal, then we are unaffected by actions. And then again, "Surrendering all actions to me, with thy thoughts resting on the Supreme Self, from hope and egoism freed, and of mental fever cured, engage in the battle." Maybe you know the Bhagavad Gita is placed, the imagery is that there is a battle that is going to start, and Arjuna, who represents us, the human being, is there in the middle of the battle and has to fight against the other people who were their relatives. So he says, should I engage in this battle? I don't want to do it. They are my relatives. Why should I do it? Of course, the relatives represent the parts of ourselves, our habits, our memories, those things that we feel are ours. And the battle is to destroy, symbolically speaking, all these aspects of ourselves to perceive the self. And Krishna is the one that is teaching Arjuna, and Krishna represents our higher nature, our divine nature. So Krishna says, if you offer your action, whatever you do, to the divine or to the Supreme Self, to the eternal, then do it as an offering and engage in the battle, engage in life. So this attitude many times helps people to act without expecting the result. So these are different strategies to develop this equanimity. And the last point is to generate this witnessing. This is a progression. First, we were performing good actions out of love, not out of selfishness. But we were still in the field of good and evil. Then, as we mature, we can come to this equanimity, which tries to be beyond these opposites. Whatever happens, I accept it. And now the last step is to go altogether beyond the field of action and to identify ourselves with pure consciousness. And this is a more mystical aspect of the path, of the spiritual path. So the Light of Asia says, "Say not, I am, I was, or I shall be. Think not, you pass from house to house of flesh," in reincarnation. "Like travelers who remember and forget, ill-lodged or well-lodged." So it says, don't identify with that entity that is reborn. Then the Bhagavad Gita says, "All actions are wrought by the qualities of nature only." The Sanskrit word for qualities is gunas. In Hinduism, it is said that all nature has like an inner activity, automatic. it has three qualities: inertia, activity, and equilibrium. So the Bhagavad Gita says everything that happens is not really an entity that is making this happening. Everything that happens, for example, now the person that is talking, is not the spirit, the pure consciousness that is talking. It's the material aspect of that pure consciousness. So it's nature, the gunas. Nature also is a translation for prakriti. Prakriti means the material. Material, not only physical, also emotional, mental. So what he's saying here, the Bhagavad Gita is saying, don't identify yourself with the actor. So all actions are wrought by the qualities of nature only. The self, the real self, deluded by the sense of egoism, thinketh, I am the doer, and goes on saying, I do not anything, should think the harmonized one, who knoweth the essence of things, seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, speaking, giving, grasping, opening and closing the eyes, he holdeth. The senses move among the objects of senses. So again, this idea, the only thing that is happening is that our senses are responding to the environment. But our real spiritual consciousness is just witnessing everything, is being aware of everything, is not really acting. So the Bhagavad Gita goes on and says, he who seeth inaction in action, and action in inaction, he is wise among men. He is harmonious, even while performing all actions. Because from a certain point of view, when we are in this state of witnessing, we are in a state of inaction inwardly. Although externally we may be doing whatever it takes. We are parents, or we are professionals, or whatever we do, we have to do it. That's our duty. That's our offering and gift to humanity. But we can be inwardly in this quiet state of witnessing, of not being really affected by what is going on. And not being affected means at the emotional level, when there is the witnessing, there is also love. It's not coldness, like if we are aloof and unrelated. The nature of our spiritual aspect is love, is happiness. So when we are in this state of witnessing, there is this thing that we call love. But then our emotions are the ones that are preventing that love from manifesting. So when we are saying be beyond actions, we are not saying being indifferent. We are saying be what you truly are, and that will manifest as love, as compassion, as happiness. So the voice of the silence says, both action and inaction may find room in thee, thy body agitated, thy mind tranquil, thy soul as limpid as a mountain lake. So this third step is, let's do whatever. First, we put harmony in ourselves. First, we got to this state where our emotions are not so strong. Then we can acquire this equanimity and try to work not thinking about the result, not being anxious about the result, but trusting that whatever happens is the right things to happen. And then we can go to this subtler space in ourselves where we are aware of everything that happens. We are aware of what we do, what happens outside, but we are with these witnesses. We are in the moment, and we are conscious of everything. And in every tradition, it is said that when we can get to this state of witnessing, that's the door that is being opened for our real self to express, for our spiritual nature to start really having an influence on our life. So this is a whole process of purification to get to that bridge between the impersonal and the personal, this state of witnessing. I don't have time to go into the aspect of meditation, but basically there are some techniques of meditation where we can try this, while sitting in our room. Maybe at the beginning it's difficult when dealing with other people to be aware of our thoughts as well as aware of what these other people are doing. So at first we may try when we are sitting in our room without so many distractions. So that's something that trains us to be aware of our psychological movement. And then we have to try to do it in our daily life. So it's like a flow. We go inside, we watch, like momentarily isolated from life, we watch inside, and then we go to life and try to live that way. Then we go again inside and we go outside. So like a flowing. And if our life and our meditation are synchronized in this attitude, then both will create this growth in this ability to remain in our pure consciousness. So this is a way that no matter what we do, if we are householder, if we are in a university, if we are digging, a hole, no matter what we do, we can generate a spiritual training in our lives, So this is something that doesn't need anything in particular. It doesn't need to be in any particular situation. It doesn't need us to go to the forest or the mountain. Our daily life is meant to be a spiritual training. And this is one approach that we can take. So now I would like to open to your comments or questions, and we have some minutes to share, thoughts about this. Be absolutely free to share whatever you think, and even if you don't agree with something, it's okay, because we are just sharing our thoughts and experience, and that's the real purpose. This is not said as an authority or a dogma at all. It's just a sharing between friends. And if you can ask for the microphone so people that are watching through the internet, they can hear your comments or questions.
He was waving at me.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you were waving at her. Okay. I thought you wanted to like.
Now you have to ask.
He will. He'll think of something.
Also from the internet, they can send us questions. And Chris will bring the question.
I want to thank you for an excellent talk. I thought you made it very clear, all the different steps. There are, of course, many other traditions that have, steps and ways to reach the same goal. Mm-hmm. Is there one right way? Is this the right path for everybody? What determines what what's the right path?
Mm-hmm. Any classification that we generate is necessarily limited. So this is not nothing. No description can cover all the aspects of life. So the idea of any kind of description is to be like a guide. From a certain point of view, whatever we do, if we do it with the right intention, will produce results, good results. Will produce what we really are looking for. If we are looking for something selfish, we'll produce more selfishness. If we are looking for really something spiritual, let's say, whatever we do will produce its results. I think this description is something, since we all share the same, more or less the same nature, is something that could probably apply to most people. You know, we need to have this harmony, then to have this equanimity. And now, how to get to that varies quite a bit, because we are all different. You know, some people, they have a devotional nature, so through this, furthering this feeling of devotion and purifying the feeling of devotion, they can get through all these states. Some other people, they can get to that through the furthering of their wisdom, you know, through real knowledge, real study of books, life of ourselves. They can develop that wisdom that allows them to see what they should do or they shouldn't, what is real and what is unreal. Some people, through, you know, action, through loving action, they also can go through these stages. And of course, we probably can talk about intermediate stages. So I would say the means to get to one place are different, and that's why there are so many different traditions. I particularly find this description as pretty general of the process of maturing, so I think it applies pretty well, but I'm absolutely open. I know that there are other presentations that could be made, and that would be very useful also. I don't know if you have any particular example that you would like to show, for example.
Well, one path or one way of looking at it is that the problem of knowing who we are and focusing on that question. Mm-hmm. And that our lack of harmony and the lack of equanimity and the lack of witnessing all stems from a single cause of mistaking who we are. Mm-hmm. And to focus on that question is
one path, yeah. Like Ramana Maharshi, for example, who am I? Or Krishnamurti would say, you know, that you can get to this by the very act of self-observation through this naked awareness. Well, naked awareness is more a part of the vocabulary of Tibetan Buddhism. He would say choiceless awareness. So, yes, what I found in myself is that, for example, I like very much these two paths that we are mentioning, you know, Ramana Maharshi's way of meditation on who am I, trying to perceive the origin of our sense of I-ness, and Krishnamurti's approach also. Now, I can do that when there is certain harmony within. When I'm going through a hard time, many times I try to remain aware of what is going on, and my consciousness is drawn, you know, in all that movement. So it depends. On many things. But I've seen that, generally speaking, certain state of harmony is needed usually. Although many times this view of the unreal happened even in the midst of the storm, and that happens also. But generally speaking, I've seen that when there is no harmony, it's harder to be able to remain in that state, but not impossible.
Yes, I was going to say that the steps for me make a lot of sense, because it would be very hard to, I think it is very hard to witness, like when we are so attached to what we think we are, and there is no this identification with what we feel, what we think. It's very hard to be a witness of that, because we feel that we are that suffering, we feel we are that, non-virtue, let's say. And so I think we need certain disidentification first, and that sense of harmony, equanimity, before we even attempt to be aware of what is happening within.
Yeah, I mean, we can try all things together. Also, this shows certain process, but it doesn't mean that we are not going to try to have equanimity until we have harmony. That will never happen. You know, we have to try all things together. But I think this is why, you know, Patanjali, he was the compiler of an old tradition in India that now we know as Raja Yoga, and there are some Patanjali. And he says that he talks about, you know, our reactions, like he calls them the kleshas, which are the causes of suffering in ourselves. And he says that the kleshas may be in different stages of expression. For example, they may be very active, or they may be in a milder action, or they may be latent, or they may be eradicated. So he says, when the kleshas are very active, we may diminish their activity by meditating on the opposite, by trying to practice the opposite virtue. Because when they are really active, we need like a force to counteract this activity and to make them, you know, mild or even latent. So then he says, when the kleshas are latent, then we can eradicate them by meditation. And with meditation, he means focusing our whole attention, undistracted attention, on something. You know, so applying our whole consciousness to something. So he also thought that there was a progression. If there is something in us, a reaction that is too strong, we may need first to try to make it weaker by a kind of discipline, by trying to practice the opposite virtue, as I said, or different strategies. Now, when that reaction is not so strong, we may act with this awareness, with this. But again, these are general things. Sometimes will happen that even in the midst of the storm, we can really see the root of that reaction. But generally speaking, yeah, it could be true.
Along the same lines, I've heard it said, to find yourself, lose yourself. Yeah, how do you do that? But what comes to mind, what you're talking about, is situations, especially, you know, difficult times. And often when parents lose a child, they throw themselves into the cause of whatever disease or situation or whatever, because it's losing yourself. You're not looking for results. You're looking, well, it's sort of selfish because you are looking for an easing of the pain for yourself, but you're helping other people. Mm-hmm. So it's,
yeah, I would say
but
that
their motivation is not selfish.
Yeah,
it is a positive result
mm-hmm.
from that. But you know, the woman who started MAD, the Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. You know, they lost mm-hmm. children in an accident, and
they don't want other people to go through that.
Right. So, mm-hmm. and it's you immerse yourself, you throw yourself into it. I mean. But you have to watch out for that pendulum swinging. You can go too far, and so then you have to, like you said, weaken that enthusiasm, or let other people take it up, mm-hmm. so that you don't go overboard. You can be a fanatic, and you know.
Yeah, I think that could happen when this activity becomes escape from our pain. So from our suffering. Whatever we do as escape, then the activity has not a value in itself, but as escape. And we will overdo anything, you know, if there is a lot of suffering and we want to go out of that. But if the intention is pure, although there is always mixed intentions, as I said, and that's normal, but if basically the intention is pure, then those are not two contradictory things. We can engage in something like that, and at the same time, we can be working on ourselves to undergo this process. You know, that our psychological nature needs certain time and maturation, or if we are able to do it, we can go, you know, beyond our psychological nature. That's also possible, and we don't have to go too much through a process. But that means that we were already trying to live in this way. Actually, when we try to live in this way, it's a wonderful tool that we have, because all psychological processes can be shortened so much. You know, we can go beyond that, so the process matures very fast. But again, that's part of our growth in whatever stage we are at.
It's not a question, but it's becoming aware, and I was told for many years, make mistakes. Well, I have a big fear of making mistakes. Then someone who works here and I respect very much. Mm-hmm. And it took me, let's see, I'm here 18 and a half years. It took me a while to accept this. I'm still working on it, but it's, I know, becoming aware of when something happens that isn't right is to be able to catch it in the bud and not make it so long. And then I could move ahead without the wondering control and all the other things that are in the way. It's just a wonderful freedom to be able to just let it go and shorten that trip. And I thank you very much, Pablo.
Yeah, that's part of the equanimity we were talking about. You know, we have to try to do our best, and whatever happens, happens. All we are asked for, if anything or anybody's asking us anything, is to do our best, not to do the things in a perfect way, whatever that may mean. So this equanimity means certain humbleness also, to be humble and to say, well, yeah, I will make many mistakes. If we don't even need to call them mistakes. When a kid is trying to learn how to walk and he falls, do we call that mistake? No, it's part of the training, it's part of the learning process. So what we call mistake, well, it's part of our learning. And whatever happens, if we are sincere, we did the best we could. Even if we fail and we did something that is wrong, well, we couldn't do it right. We tried. So that very try will allow us next time to do it better, just because we are going to be more mature. So this equanimity means that. But our regrets, our sense of guilt, which at certain level is better than, you know, being reckless, but that again comes from our sense of selfishness. You know, we don't like to see that we do wrong things. And we are humanity. All of us are constantly doing wrong things. What do we expect? This is humanity. So that's the way things are. Just try to be in this state, try to do the best thing and take whatever comes out of that. Now for real.
The question of giving, a lot of times, I'll speak for myself, give and give and give, but then unable to accept from someone else the giving. And you sort of have to flip it on its head, and it's actually a gift if you allow that to happen. And I just wonder, maybe that's related to the harmony within me. And I just wondered if you had some thoughts on that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something very common, I think, all of us. That happens to all of us in some way or the other. The problem is that sometimes in this act of giving, as I said, we have mixed, processes inside. So sometimes this act of giving is a way of feeling that we are strong, or a way of trying to control, or a way of feeling able, secure. This idea of being the superhero, which brings certain security to ourselves. So when that is when that is inside our consciousness, to receive is seen as a weakness on our part. We are being helped, that means we are weak. So this all has to do with the psychological maturity that we are getting. These are subtle aspects. They happen in us, to all of us. But as we are aware of these processes, there is a purification. Because the problem is when we are not aware of things. If we are not aware that this is going on inside us, then it will never get solved. But the very fact of being aware makes us realize it and relax. And even if I feel weak, I'm aware that I'm feeling that. And that awareness is really a spiritual perception. The spiritual perception has the power of creating order in our psychological being. So when we allow this choiceless awareness, as Krishnamurti would say, that awareness produces order. We don't have to do something to, put order in that. As we said, if there is something that is really, really out of order, then we may have to do something through our will first to, Krishnamurti also used to say, if the room is too messy that we cannot even open the door or the window, there is no possibility for a breeze to come in. So put in order your room and open the window, and the breeze may come, the breeze being this spiritual perception or the bare perception of truth.
We have a question from the internet. In fact, it's from Dave. He asks, does the inner observer, the witness, create a duality of what should be one?
Well, yeah, that's something I remember when I tried to start working on this, on being aware. I used to work in research in a lab. So while I was doing my experiments, I tried to be aware of what I was doing and aware of myself. But I found that I was either aware of the experiments or I was aware of myself. I couldn't be aware of both at the same time. So I wonder how this is not possible. Then I kept trying. That's all we have to do always, keep trying. And something begins to change. And now I can say that at the beginning, I was watching, not really from this state of witnessing, but I was watching from my psychological self, from a center. So there was a duality there between the observer and the observed. So either I, as a psychological self, was watching what I was doing, or I was watching myself, but it was always a center that was watching something separate. So it may happen that we think we are in this state of witnessing, and actually is a state of duality still. But that's okay, it's part of the process, it's part of the learning. Eventually there is a witnessing which, as far as I can see it, is unitive. It doesn't create a duality. Probably there is certain duality there that I'm not perceiving, because this is, as I said, is a process. But let's say that this is a much more unitive perception where there is not, that's why I wrote down witnessing and not so much witness. Because in this witnessing, there is no sense of being the witness. If we feel we are the witness, then there is duality. This witnessing is just something that happens, not that I do. So I am within this witnessing. There is something that is witnessing, not myself. Not in a schizophrenic way, but just this sense of, maybe in another way I could explain it, there is a sense of being the space within everything happens. So we are not identified with one particular movement in that psychological space, with the observer or the observed. We feel we are the space embracing everything. So I would say, yeah, that may happen, but when that witnessing is purified, then we can get to a more unitive perception.
This question has to do with HPB, and her influence has been major in the way people look at spirituality, and has touched the lives of almost everybody in the Western Hemisphere, if not broader, and yet she's mostly unknown, which is kind of ironic. So that's just a statement. The question is, how much did she embody the ideal of which she wrote about?
Yes, she said, and the same said people who were around, that she was something weird. And sometimes she said a sphinx, like the riddle of the sphinx. Sphinx, you say in English? Sphinx. Yeah. And no, but she wasn't really a normal person, in the sense that her role was a particular one, where she was undergoing a lot of things on the occult aspect of herself. For example, in one of her teachers, in a letter that he writes to some English theosophists, he said, there is an aspect of Blavatsky which is not completely wholesome. When there are people in the world doing this particular work, we keep, this is, if to understand that, we need certain theosophical background about the principles and all that, but they said, we keep something from this person which serves as a link to the person, and also as an assurance that the person is doing the right thing. So he said that at the psychological level, at the spiritual level, Blavatsky is one thing. At the psychological level, there is something that is not there. So therefore, many times, for example, she would explode emotionally, and people who were around said, when she was in those explosions, if you would ask her any question about theosophy, immediately every reaction disappeared, and she would talk as if she were giving a talk. And many people said that about her. So I don't think we could take Blavatsky as an example in this sense, And on the other hand, many people say that she had a heart that really was not matched by anybody around, and even people who really tried to destroy her and the TS, like the Coulombs and other people, later on they came back to her in despair, and she gave them all she had, and that she had no trace of any kind of anger or Blavatsky is a real special case, and since we don't worship people, I think it's safe, because there is a risk in saying, this is also said about gurus or lamas. An enlightened person may do things and mean something different from what that action would mean in a normal person. And that's dangerous, because you are justifying whatever that person is doing. Although it may be true, but it's dangerous. So I'm not trying to justify Blavatsky, I'm just saying that she wasn't normal in that aspect. So I don't think we can take her as example of, but at the same time, her life and her work is very inspiring for many people. It is for me Although, as I said, I don't have this attitude of hero worshipping. So as any person, she has her flaws, and some people would ask, well, but you have these emotional explosions, and Blavatsky would say, don't use that to justify your emotional explosions, And she said, my loss is your gain, because if not for this, I wouldn't be here. I would be working on the inner planes, not on the physical plane. So I don't know, that's what I could say about that.
There is probably one last question from someone from Argentina, because it's signed Mascalzone. And the question is, this state of awareness, but in equanimity, let's say, is only possible when there is a whole attention, when there is complete attention of the mind's process. So when there is a witness of the mind's process, in that moment, is not there any selfhood, he wrote. I mean, he probably meant...
Selfhood.
Oh, selfhood is fine.
Well, I would say that there are two different states. One state of selfhood or I-ness is the state where we identify ourselves with our personality. So I am this, I am Pablo, or I am the thinker, I am the doer. So this is I am something. And this is the root of our misconception about what we are. But when there is a real, pure sense of witnessing, there is still a sense of I amness, but not I am this. There is a sense of existing, of being, which is not identified with our psychological process. So it is still a sense of being, but since it's not identified with anything in particular, it's like more unitive. It's just a sense of being, of I am. So if by selfhood we are talking about this personal sense of being, then yeah, this selfhood is not there in the right witnessing. Now this pure self-consciousness, pure self-awareness might be there while we are witnessing. That is why it is said that witnessing is not the last stage. There is a state that is beyond even this question of witnessing. But witnessing is the door that opens, to a further stage that is beyond our conception, beyond our words, beyond states. So this witnessing is still at the level of the pure sense of I-ness.